All right, good evening, everyone. I am pleased to call this meeting of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to order. You use the gavel at the beginning and the end, right? That's not just okay. Yeah, there we go. We're open. Welcome, everyone. Hello to Lou. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that tensions ran a little high at the last meeting, and I've spoken with almost everyone individually, and I think that we are ready to model conflict resolution and reconciliation and sort of refocus and rededicate ourselves. In fact, I think that that conflict made visible the need to re-examine and recommit to our goals and our strategy for pursuing those goals. So I'm actually excited for tonight's meeting because I think both work groups have discussed some ways that we might move forward a little bit differently. And I think that will ultimately be really good for the work of the commission. Our next order of business is the approval of the February 14th minutes. I would hear a motion to approve those minutes.
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any amendments? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Excellent. The minutes are approved. And thank you to Nicole for taking such excellent minutes and under challenging conditions sometimes. The dialectic is complex. Our next discussion items are report outs from our working group. And the research group is first on the agenda. So I will share some of what we discussed. We met twice since our last meeting. And we have really been focused like a laser on the report that is due at the end of this commission's time. We're called a commission, but really, given the short duration of our group, we're more like a task force. And so we've really been trying to keep our eyes on the prize in terms of a final product, which will be a report filled with recommendations for the Borough Council to consider. And so we started thinking more about how to organize those recommendations. And then we started thinking about the strategy for executing that work. How should we organize ourselves in such a way that we can really meet those deadlines? And how do we focus our efforts, given that it seems like there's always a whirlwind of things that come up constantly that require our attention? And so we proposed a kind of division of labor and a plan for arriving at recommendations in the time given. And so we proposed this, and I believe Community Engagement Group, you discussed it as well, that we really focus on 4 to 5 topic areas, and I'll list those, but first let me describe the kind of structure we're proposing. We're going to have kind of 4 to 5 baskets, and across those 4 to 5 baskets, we're going to have a couple of threads woven through all baskets. So the baskets we're thinking about making recommendations in, and the goal is to make 2 to 3 recommendations per area at least. That's kind of the goal. The areas are law enforcement, commerce, housing, and arts and culture. And the threads that we see being woven throughout those baskets include education and community outreach. So those are kind of methods or skills that can be used throughout those 4 baskets. And as I was walking over this evening, it occurred to me that health is something we should consider. So that is not something coming out of the working group because we actually didn't get to that. But we might want to consider tonight as a group, do we want public health to be one of the baskets, or do we want public health to be one of the fibers woven through each of the baskets, kind of uniting them? So that's something to discuss. And we thought that it would be good if we started setting some month-to-month goals, like for each content area. By each meeting, we will have a draft recommendation to consider. And I can share some of what we came up with, and research group members feel free to jump in anytime. We focused on law enforcement because Member Donaldson has done so much preparation and research. And we considered this as a candidate recommendation that might occur in something like a final report. Again, these are just draft recommendations, things that we're considering. So here's a candidate. Revisit the residency requirement for Carlisle police officers. There's some literature about the effect that residency requirements have on building trust within a community. And so we are looking at that as a candidate recommendation, for example. And we discussed how there's kind of a feedback loop where you kind of, through your lived experience and through your preliminary research, might zero in on a recommendation, and then that recommendation might require subsequent research because it's coming from another community, and you might wonder, how does that fit in our community, and would it work here, and what are we already doing? So the research group kind of had a good discussion about methodology, where we talked about the nature of research and how we're going to be in that back and forth cyclical feedback loop of stumble upon a recommendation, do further research, and we really feel we should get comfortable with that, and that's an appropriate process to follow as we zero in on the due date for that report. So we're hoping to make recommendations like that, the idea being that they are appropriate for the council to act on, that is, they fall within the authority of the borough, that they're actionable, that they're concrete, that they're specific. And our suggestion for kind of moving forward is that maybe we rethink the configuration of the work groups. If we think about community engagement as a fiber that's being woven through those 4 baskets, it may make sense to divide the work groups in terms of those topical areas. So maybe we do, for instance, law enforcement and commerce will be one work group, and housing and arts and culture will be another. And those 2 work groups will consider not only those topic areas, but the way that education and community engagement might be woven into those topic areas. And we wanted to approach the community engagement group about possibly considering some of the events that they have been doing as a pilot program for recommendations. So could we conceive of the work that you have been doing as a trial run for a longer term recommendation? So the report might contain a recommendation that the borough continue to hold thinking about race Thursdays, or some such recommendation as that. I think that was a lot of me talking. So let me step back and ask if any of my working group mates would like to add anything, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the whole commission. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that you covered it very well. I think the only other thing to add is that we were not set on what the kind of 2 configurations, but maybe it would be law enforcement and arts or something like that, and commerce and culture. But we had the idea that everyone might work on topical areas.
Community engagement. Any questions for us about our report?
One question on, so something like thinking about Race Thursday, or would the recommendation be that we continue doing so and then also leave it as a potential recommendation?
I think open right now, the idea might be that you form a permanent community outreach commission, or that you appoint, you create a position within the borough where one of the responsibilities of that person might be to generate opportunities for dialogue in the community. I think it's kind of wide open what precise shape that takes, but could you conceive of your work? Frankly, the idea is a little bit to take the pressure off. I think watching that meeting made me realize that this commission feels like we have the one and only opportunity to collect feedback from the community about intergenerational trauma and all manner of experiences of marginalization. And that's simply not something we can do in a few months. So what is a sustainable what's a recommendation for a sustainable way of collecting that feedback and generating opportunities for people to share their experiences?
I thought Raz was also asking, like, well, what do we do in the meantime? Do we continue having it or not? And I don't know if we made a decision or even have a recommendation. Maybe it makes sense to continue doing it if the recommendation is ultimately going to be to continue it. But yeah, I don't know if the group in general had any view about what would happen in the meantime.
Yeah, I think we should continue for the meantime. And I say that because if we can really look at the process and look at how to work out the kinks now, then that really will help, in the future as far as getting people to attend events, gaining their trust. So, at this point, let's keep going.
I would agree with that. I think I want to go back and revisit the goals, and I meant to do that beforehand. But I think one of our stated objectives was to listen and to engage the community. So I agree with what you're proposing, but I do think it's something that we should continue to listen as a form of gathering evidence and testimony.
I'll have some information to share at the community working group, the community engagement working group too, that I think will substantiate that.
Yeah, I think the research group had no view on the shape that those events should continue to take, other than it seems like they're going positively, but just the main thought was take the pressure off a little bit. This isn't your only opportunity to collect feedback. The other thing we talked about, this reminded me one more thing before I close down my report. Raph had an update on Colleen Murphy. She is an incredibly busy person and is not able to come and give a public address until May or June. But in the meantime, she is willing to do a Zoom conference with our group to help inform us about the shape that this kind of work has taken in other communities in the meantime. Raph, is there anything I should add?
No. And I guess the other thing is May or June at the very earliest, and unlikely even then. So she suggested maybe the better idea is have the Zoom earlier so that we can draw on her for information gathering purposes. But then for the purposes of a public lecture, as I said, June probably at the earliest is what she said with her schedule, but maybe more likely in the fall because so many people are away from Carlisle in the summer months, is what she suggested.
Great. Any other questions for research group before we hand it over?
Just as far as Colleen Murphy, with the public lecture, is that the format that she's most comfortable talking to the community in? And let me just say why I'm asking. If we're continuing with our thinking about race, is there a way that maybe she comes and speaks during one of those sessions?
I don't think that's off the table at all. I had initially asked if she might do a public lecture because when we had initially talked about speakers, which was pretty early, it was on our in our action plan. We said we were going to try to get people in November. We hadn't yet had Thinking About Race Thursday as an idea. So I think integrating them is probably a really good idea. So yeah, I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
So the June date, if we're keeping with our second Thursdays, would be June 9th. There's some significance for that holiday, for that day in the borough. We can talk about that another time.
So I think what I'm getting from this is, because I said I'll bring this to the group, is pitch here are the second Thursdays from May onward. Which of these looks like they're doable?
Yeah, I think that would be a solid way to go. I don't know what others might think.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you for your patience. That was a long one.
Do we need to take an actionable item on that? On that restructure?
Why don't we, so under new business, realignment of working groups, that will be a time for us to have a group conversation about what baskets and what fibers we would like to organize. So why don't we save that conversation for D2?
That works.
Great.
We're on the community engagement
You are.
working group report. Not actually much from my end. From a lot of the discussion, Doreen, especially, I know you attended the Black Culture Fest, so I know you had some talking points. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
First of all, the Black Cultural Fest was a wonderful event for our community. Many of you came and supported. We did get a few names written down on paper, so we'll be talking about next steps as far as contacting them and talking to them about their experiences. So we also had kind of a table sign made that we can use for future events that we'll just kind of bring people over to our table and help us engage in important conversations. The next thing that we talked about, and you can jump in as you need, just listening events, as we had just talked about, and what we can do to make those better. So I wanted to just cover that for a moment. As I look at the meetings here, we're looking at maybe one event could be a listening event. We provide appetizers. Everybody likes to come out for food. I know I do. So that's something that we had talked about. Another one is I think we just need to go to churches a little bit more and really open up dialogue with churches a little bit more and see if we can have a church as a venue. And I know, Tawanda, you had stated that at this point in time, some of the churches are not open due to COVID, correct?
Yes, but I do have an update from Bridge Builders on that.
Okay, well, good. So that sounds wonderful. And then the third event would be something that I'm personally interested in, is an event really targeting the youth. Today at school, I had the opportunity to meet with my Black Student Union, and we talked about some of their concerns. And I want to make it clear, I really talked to them about the difference between education and government. Because, of course, when I asked for information, they wanted to jump in about the school dances and the music that's played or not played. So, I wanted to make sure that we jumped in on that. So I'm going to go over a few points that they shared with me. And they're kind of all over the place. I didn't have a moment today to really organize them, so please just bear with me. First of all, one of the most insightful comments that I found is that when it comes to youth in the community, they feel that people are quick to criticize. Why are they hanging around? Why are they walking through town? XYZ. But they feel that there aren't many places for them to go. Now, they are excited about the skate park. And so we talked about that. And they hope that is an inclusive and welcoming place. But they certainly would like to see more things occur for the youth in the community so that they're not always targeted in a negative manner. And I thought that was actually really good. So when I asked them for suggestions, they talked about the community center. And they said, hey, you know what if there's only one basketball hoop outside in the community center. I know, a lot of kids love basketball. Their suggestion, what if we had a drop-in basketball time where they, even if it's outside, where there's an hour, let's say between 6 and 8, and they can drop in, they can play ball. They don't have to worry about the signing in and the signing up. They just want a place to go. And they all agreed that if that were available to them, they would definitely take advantage of it. They also stated that when they do go to the community center, the basketballs are often flat. They can't necessarily, have fun with just the one hoop that's outside. They looked at community nights. And I was pleasantly surprised by this. So they would love to have community nights that are targeted towards teens. We know that we have First Fridays, but they said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, basically they feel that the community would look at them more favorably if there were more events to bring them in town and to converse with business owners and whatnot. So I thought it was really, really insightful of them. They're sad that the skating rink is gone, but I told them I'm not a millionaire, so there's nothing I can do about that. So we talked a little bit about their relationship with police, and they were very, forthright about that. And I will say, kids pay attention, and they can tell you who treats them with respect and who doesn't. And they know names. And so, that's something that we also talked about. We talked about businesses and the fact that they feel, and this is their observation, that if they are with their friends and there are two or more and they are literally just shopping, they feel watched. They've heard people say to them, watch her, watch him, or they've been physically followed. But when they look at their white counterparts, the same is not true. And it was very interesting. One statement that I do want to make, not to create division, but just to state their reality or their perception, either one. They said that they know of kids who, quote unquote, look clean cut, and they're the ones that are stuffing things in their bags. They are there in their brown skin and, just with their friends, but they're harassed and other groups are ignored. And so I definitely wanted to state that. So I think there's room for us to really create some type of level of communication between the business community and teenagers. They want us to revitalize the old Bonton site. But again, I'm not a millionaire, so, not going to do that one. We talked about housing. And, it was very, very interesting to hear their point of views. They feel that, and again, this is their perception, that the streets upon which they live are not as well maintained as the streets on the quote unquote other side of the tracks, their words. And that, they said, makes them feel a certain way. It makes them, they're resentful of it. And I honestly don't blame them. So the words that they use were, again, well maintained. And I wrote, it says, they noticed that the houses populated by low income or people of color are not well maintained. Looking here. Interestingly enough, they also discussed black hair care and beauty products that they would like to see in the stores, or in, it says, let's see, hair care businesses who mostly serve white customers. They would like them to be well versed in black hair care. And one of my little babies, she is a mixed young lady, and she said that she has tried to patronize some of our hair care salons here in the borough, and she'd love to be able to walk to a place to get her hair done. But if the person there does not know about our texture, right, and our styles, then that certainly keeps her from supporting the businesses in the borough, and that's what we want. This was an interesting one. I believe it's in the summer months, and Sean, you can correct me on this, when bands come and they show up in different parks, or okay. So they said that they've looked at the list before, and they would not, and I quote, I would not step foot there because I don't listen to bluegrass. And I had to chuckle, but it's so true because, I like to sit in a park and I like to listen. But if there isn't a wonderful mixture of music, 1 week it could be country, another week it could be R&B or a jazz band, but that automatically makes them feel as if they are not included. These babies are wonderful, I have to tell you. So, and they even suggested, I didn't write this down, but that maybe one of the bands is something that teens would like. And I thought, okay, all right. I offered to sing for them. They turned me down. For the most part, they talked about food, but I don't cook either. So, but for the most part, that's about it. I think they do want a closer relationship with our officers. They even brought up the 3-on-3 basketball tournaments, and it was funny. They brought up the fact that after such events, people don't clean, and they said we'll just hold the gifts until everybody cleans. So they even had a solution to the problem of cleaning up after the event. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our future, and I think we're in great hands.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Amen.
Anything else from community engagement? I mean, anything else? That's a hard act to follow. You lifted my heart right up. I love hearing about those youth.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
To stay on community engagement.
Sure.
So, I did have a conversation. I was actually able to present to bridge builders, and I have a conversation about what we were envisioning as far as sort of a white congregation and a black congregation, and trading off and encouraging their congregants to be involved. And I asked them if there was, like, if anybody had any questions or like feedback or wanted more information, to shoot an email, and I can't access that here. So I would say we probably have been in at some church like that. I feel like it was received favorably, and it seems like it's something that could happen, maybe even for the April thinking about race. So maybe at the next community engagement group, we can think a little bit more about that event, and maybe even to bring some food in to that event based on that recommendation as well. And so that's that as far as the thinking about race. And then did we want to talk about the request that we received from Margaret St. Mary's? The,
St. Margaret Mary?
yeah, St. Margaret Mary.
I'm sorry.
What did I say?
No.
Mary
Not
Margaret.
something.
I was
Not Catholic is what I am not.
my apologies. No, I was thinking more of the body of the email. Did not even read like the name of the school. That's my fault. Based on this, so I'm still trying to understand exactly what the request is. But this is what I forwarded earlier in the day that I now remember that I forwarded earlier in the day. I'm catching up. I don't know, given our capacity, even given some of the discussion later on down the agenda here, I'm not sure if that's something that we want to expand. But even if not, I figured this could be a cool opportunity for individual engagement. So still worth bringing to the group and to see if we'd like to be involved in this. It seems like, from what I'm understanding, I might need to collect a little more information. It seems as though this hasn't quite crystallized yet, but they're more looking to see if we had resources. And my first response was, we don't offer a ton in terms of resources, but establishing a presence would probably be our first.
Can I make a recommendation from this point forward? Any sort of requests or invitations like that we get, I think our practice should be you can help us by leveraging your relationships. Because something we have trouble with as a commission in terms of developing community engagement events and eventually hopefully recommendations is we're a commission. We sit up here and we have this official borough status, but we don't have personal relationships in some cases. And so what we might do is leverage those connections to get an audience with people to get their feedback. So I would say our practice should be when someone reaches out and asks for our help, if it's can you staff something or can you provide resources, I think we should tend towards no, that's not really our charge. What we are charged with is creating this report and facilitating sessions to listen. And you can help us with the facilitating sessions to listen so that we might refine our recommendations about a more permanent system for collecting feedback in the borough. That would be my recommendation for how we handle all such inquiries.
No, that's perfect, and I can respond in kind, I think, and articulate that. And I need to copy everyone here on that message too, which I will do. But thank you, I agree.
Another thought along with that is that we might note that we're getting these requests, because maybe one of the things that the community is saying indirectly is that they might want some body that has funding capacity to fund projects of some kind or to staff certain kinds of things. Like, I don't know if that is something that we ultimately want to recommend, but if we hear it like 12 times, maybe that's something that at least the community feels like they want.
Absolutely. Like maybe a recommendation might be some kind of chief diversity officer type position, and that it could be that person's responsibility to network and provide support between these different entities. But I think it's a great idea to monitor how many of these kinds of requests are coming in. And certainly as individuals, we should feel very welcome to do whatever we'd like to do to support these groups. Good. All right. Thank you, Community Engagement Group. Item C is funding. Tawana, I'm going to hand it over to you for this one. Is that okay? I'm not sure I am the most well-versed person on this.
Yeah, we had talked about it a little bit at our last meeting, and probably I think a good place to come away from this meeting would be to see who would be interested in how we want that budget to be developed. Do we want that to be an all hands on deck process? Do we want it to be 2 or 3 people? And who would want to do that is probably the best way to spend time with that.
Personally, for efficiency's sake, I would trust one person to be a kind of budget liaison, learn the process, develop a preliminary budget, teach the rest of us how to submit requests. I think we're already spread too thin with our numbers dwindling. That was not me volunteering.
I'm willing to work with another person on it. I don't think it should be one person.
I was not going to volunteer given the shortness of my tenure. I was going to say I think that there are 2 different kinds of questions. So one is the nuts and bolts, learning how to request funds, and I think that is a thing that should be, there might be one person doing it. But there's another larger question, which is like, there should be a general shape to our budget, and maybe that's the kind of thing that we need collective input on. So that's all I was going to say. I have thoughts about what that budget might look like, but that's an initial thought.
I'll volunteer to help out.
Excellent. So since I am really feeling like we need to focus on execution, sorry, I'm a deadline-driven person. I'm looking at the calendar and I'm like, whoa, we're not going to get there. Raz, could we hold you accountable for, at next meeting, being able to educate us on how to submit a budget request? Is that too ambitious?
Yes and no, respectively.
I was willing to work with somebody.
On this, I thought after RAF split it up. And
Yeah, I thought they were together.
I thought that I understood you to be saying it would be okay for one person to figure out the nuts and bolts of how do you make a budget request, how do you submit it, how do you do the paperwork, and that the collective effort would be what is the general shape of our budget.
Okay, so then what is he Raz, what are you volunteering for?
I thought finding out logistically how you submit a request and budget codes and all that sort of thing. Reimbursements.
I'm fine either way. I was looking for clarity.
Why don't I make that real simple and just have the borough manager email that to you? I mean that, right?
Okay.
So that then you don't have to have somebody go out on a search party to figure that out.
Excellent. You're off the hook.
Yeah, I think the other question is probably the more important question: how you tackle that. So we have. I know. I'll give you a sense of what we do on council. We have a finance committee, and although the staff is working on the budget, just about year round, it seems. Finance committee is sort of the first filter, and that's just 2 members of council, just to kind of give some direction. The mayor gets brought in on that also. So you could tackle that as sort of I'm just throwing suggestions out. You can do what you're going to do, but you could have 1 or 2 people work on here's what we think a basic framework should look like. Bring that back and then have a discussion on that. Or you're all going to be sitting around trying to hash out what the details of the budget would look like, rather than sort of having it sort of blocked out for you in advance of that discussion. Does that make sense? Instead of having sort of a free-for-all in the midst of one of these meetings, just maybe have a couple of you sort of block things out.
Okay. So thankfully the mayor's going to help us out and get us sorted on the logistical details. Then we need 2 members who are willing to draft a preliminary budget. And Twan, it sounds like you are willing to.
Yeah, I was willing to, unless someone else. But
This
I don't
is like one
want
of
to
the
do
only
it.
occasions in my life I find myself not spending money on anything. So I
I really don't want to do it by myself, though. I don't think that's appropriate.
I'm willing to help out.
Okay.
I also think that nobody's doing anything by themselves ever, because everything ultimately comes back to this body for approval. Okay, so We
So
have-
we'll bring that back to the next meeting. Is that the?
yeah. So can we hold you accountable for that goal, you two? Tawanda and Raz, would you be willing to come back with a preliminary draft budget? And that's all you're responsible for is just the draft product, and then the rest of us will amend and vote on it at the next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Are we ready to move on to new business? All right, equity leaders.
So we had talked a little bit at our last meeting about Dr. Marcellus Taylor pulling a group together, and that's something that's still in the works. So there's no really further update on that.
It was the thought that one of us would be represented on that group, or
Yes.
okay. Maybe that's something that actually dovetails nicely into D2, which is the realignment of working groups, because we need to figure out what to do with health. Is it going to be a basket, or is it going to be a fiber woven throughout all of the baskets? Is this metaphor making sense to everyone?
I just like hearing you say basket.
Yeah. So that might be a good way for us to get more information about the health piece. Although, if you'll indulge me for a moment, Doreen, you really got the wheels turning here when you were reporting on the youth, because I was thinking, gosh, so many of these things are actually health. So the basketball hoop is a health proposal. So do we want to make some recommendations that might eventually funnel to Parks and Rec or something like that about some facilities and equipment needs? Hair care, that's kind of health meets arts and culture. Youth meets other populations. I was thinking about the possibility of an onboarding kit for new community members where we have a directory of different types of businesses, and we engage with the community of realtors and have a kind of bias disruption chat and put those things together for people who are new to our community. But it sounds like there are people who are not new to our community who...
Yeah, that actually is something that I would love, because when I first moved from Ohio to Pennsylvania, and I did not know anyone, and I was looking for black hair care, and I was looking for, just that community. I had nothing. So I would definitely want that to be something that is available.
It's just the way that I'm thinking about it. And we're saying that would be a health concern or a health basket?
I don't think necessarily health basket, if I'm understanding the metaphor.
There's a question: is health a basket, or is health a fiber that's woven throughout the baskets?
Okay, girl. I don't know. I'm going. It's a plastic bottle over here, so we're going to turn it into something. And the bottom of the bottle. No. So I think that we look at, yes, healthcare, but we also look at community partners that specialize, or not even specialize, but that are inclusive in nature, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is that those who may cater to, black hair care, right? Those who may braid hair, those who, right, who have, clothing that our kids enjoy and love. There's so many different things.
We may. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say the
Yeah.
reason why I'm asking about it being the health basket or
Okay.
not, because I think a lot of even what you just said now falls into that commerce category. But I don't know that it necessarily falls into commerce in the way that we've been talking about commerce. And I think maybe that could be a thread of both education and community outreach in commerce.
But let's
If
not
I may,
hung up on.
I concur. If I may jump in, and I didn't want to cut anyone off. Under commerce, we've outlined with the chamber a couple of areas, and I think you're absolutely right. There certainly is a crosswalk between what you've been discussing and commerce, particularly in the area of discrimination and consumer and business owner relationships and the like. Now, I have several bins, I'll call them bins, inside the basket for commerce. And much of what you're discussing with respect to like hair care and maybe other products and the like, even relationships between owner operators and patrons, are all sort of wrapped up in this Chamber of Commerce kind of basket, as at least some of the areas where the chamber has acknowledged there needs to be improvement. They have some anecdotal stories similar to what we heard here, and we're seeking data from them, as you know, to then monitor and move forward and regularly report. So clearly, yeah, I concur that a lot of that is woven in the commerce area. There are other areas of commerce, right, that this has nothing to do with, like the inordinate loan interest issue for emerging Black businesses and the like, which is certainly, we think, there's a causality relationship on the reason why many of these businesses don't take off and why you don't have necessarily the variety of goods available for the Black community that you might expect in the Carlisle area. You would have to go online for them, or we've talked about in the past the underground economy, where there are ways to get what you want, but it's not very easy. It's who you know, and there's some access issues there. So I concur. A lot of what we're talking about would certainly go into our report, I think, in the commerce area.
Can I make 2 points? First, I think let's try not to expend too much energy worrying which precise basket something fits in. We can even create a category that's like miscellaneous or integrated, where we have.
Don't stop now, potpourri.
Yes. We can. We don't have to worry about sort of categorization or turf wars. There are going to be many recommendations we come up with that there's a crosswalk, as Lou said. So let's not get too hung up on what goes into commerce or what goes into some other basket. That's point one. Strong communication is going to fix that problem. Once we divvy up these baskets, we're just going to have to really commit to talking to one another about those areas where there's intersection, and I'm confident we can do that. The second thing is, as we're thinking about recommendations in these baskets, we need to have laser-like focus on concrete, executable recommendations. So we need to steer away from things, I think, like build strong relationships between X and Y. Because what will it look like to do that? How will we know that we've met that goal? What we can do is say, we believe that in fiscal year the borough should compile a welcome kit for new residents that includes places of worship, hair care facilities, grocery stores, and a kind of directory of business. We believe that free bias disruption training should be offered to the local business community, maybe partnering with the Chamber of Commerce for that, where those are concrete, executable things that we can do. Does that make sense to everyone? Is like we have to eventually bring it back to this is something we can take action on.
It makes sense. And even as we were talking, I thought I had a thought about those recommendations. And I think we've talked about it a little bit before, but those recommendations are borough specific, right? Like, so we're making these recommendations to borough council for the things that they can control, right?
Right.
But I also think there's a need for general recommendations.
There's a need.
I know.
Should
Well,
we?
I know. But just hear me out, right? I think that we can come away from this with some recommendations based off of the information that we've gathered. And while they may not be things that the borough can do or under the borough's purview, we can still make the recommendation, even though they may not be able to do anything about it. So, as we're talking about black hair care, right? I think a strong recommendation could be, how about putting our hair care products with everybody else's so that we don't continue to feel isolated and marginalized. Like, so I think that's a recommendation that can be made.
So my issue there, and like I will admit that I am really maybe extreme about goal setting. I have been through this a lot. It's my job now. I am an equity and inclusion trainer. You set up all these goals. You don't meet any of them because they're not under your influence, your sphere of influence. And then everybody's super frustrated and throws up their hands. Once again, we had a group that said they were going to do everything and spread themselves too thin, a set of goals that they weren't actually in a position to achieve, and now everybody's frustrated. So that's my big worry, is like 100%, I agree with you that hair care products should not be segregated. But if I can't make Target desegregate their beauty section with the levers I have my hands on, what good am I doing in putting that recommendation forward? And maybe there is some good that I'm not seeing.
I think if Jinx.
Go ahead.
I think if I'm understanding you, I think that you are looking for something to be on record, stating that this is an issue. So let's just envision at the end of this, if we have the categories of commerce, education, parks and rec, health, miscellaneous, that at some point, people who work in those various categories will be able to look up the recommendations, right? But attached to those recommendations are some of those other items that you speak of that are observations, that are important, so that they're there, they're a matter of record. So it's not that we are necessarily saying, we have to take care of this X, Y, right now. But here it is. This is something that you and your business really need to consider. And then maybe if we have a chief diversity officer, maybe they can follow up.
Yes, right. So that it's a matter of record, and maybe it's something like an appendix to the report.
What about, so I totally hear the point of bearing witness is important. I believe that. I'm on the same page as you. Sometimes we can't do anything about problems, but let other people know that we do see them. What if we put this in the arts and culture / beautification category, and we ask the borough to use some of the surfaces they have for a bearing witness wall, where citizens can come up and, be invited to help co-create a mural where we record and bear witness to some of these things. And that way it's also a public education engagement exercise, because citizens will be walking by and see what other residents of the borough have put on that wall. And it could be a kind of provocative witness-bearing art piece. So it's something the borough can execute on, and we're bearing witness. Because I'm just worried that no one's going to look at that report.
Yeah.
Let me, if I may, just very quickly add, in my limited engagement with the chamber so far, they are very cognizant of borough issues, the mayor's views particularly on diversity, inclusion, and equity and the like. And I believe if our report is to be public, certainly having some of this material appear in that report would have an impact on the Chamber of Commerce and its membership, which, as I mentioned before, is quite huge with respect to the businesses that we're talking about here. So just having it, I agree, just a matter of having some of the material as a matter of public record might be helpful.
And maybe it's not something that we have to necessarily figure out tonight, but we just know that in the construction of the final report, these may be some things that we like to maybe get in as an appendix or as something, but
I was going to say this for talking about announcements, but it seems, well, part of what I was going to say in the announcement I think is relevant here. So I spent Friday at a conference hosted by Ohio State about truth and reconciliation commissions around the country. And so I got to talk to other people who serve on such commissions. And they were all constituted in extremely different ways. There was like New York City's one, Charleston, South Carolina's one, other places just all over the country. And one thing that I feel like I learned from them is that these reports will be talked about. That's what they made clear. Not always in nice ways, but these reports will be talked about. Like when they are issued, and especially when certain people are called out, they will be talked about. So I actually very much agree with you, Twanda, in thinking that there's a really important place for saying, even though like borough council can only do certain things, there are other problems that this being in a government report can shed light on. Like the general goal that we have is truth and reconciliation. Government cannot all by itself like make reconciliation. Like that's not a power the government has, but it can facilitate and give notice and bear witness in ways that might move us toward that. And so I think it really will be important if we say, look, Target, you're doing things that are racist. They will have a response. Maybe the response will be the right one, namely stop doing the wrong things. But I think that will be helpful in moving our community forward. And I don't think it takes any time away from or because I don't think we should view our time as like that limited, in that we can say, borough, here's the thing that you can actually do, but here's some outstanding problems and issues that other people in our community could work on that could bring us closer to the ultimate goal. And the last thing I'll say just about our time is that there were some commissions that were given 60 days. There were some that were given 2 years. And so I obviously, when I learned this, I'm like, on the one hand, I feel like we are really limited. On the other hand, I'm like, we have a lot of opportunity. And so I think that we should really think we can move forward with a lot of our recommendations and a lot of our work.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that we've struggled with, which reminds me, I was going to call for an executive session at the end of this meeting, because I think one of the things that we've struggled with is a time to, like retreat style, in a room with newspaper or whiteboards all around us for a few hours and being able to plot some of this. Like we've done all of this over, e-docs and all of that sort of thing. And I think that could be helpful, maybe not in the immediate future, but it's sometime between now and the construction of the report.
I think that could be helpful. Sorry, I'm always sort of keeping track of who is supposed to be doing what here. So once we divvy up these baskets, something that we're all going to be responsible for, I'm hearing consensus that there's a lot of value in having an appendix that makes recommendations beyond the borough's sphere of authority. So once we divvy up the baskets, could we agree that each person is responsible for keeping a kind of personal appendix that will eventually be compiled? So I'll trust each individual commissioner to keep a running list of recommendations that apply to the broader community, but that you understand to fall outside of the sphere of authority of the borough. And that way we aren't starving our main recommendations for oxygen, but we have a place to keep those things. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So we are all committed to doing that, and the way I'm going to hold us accountable for that is that at each meeting henceforth I will ask if people have items on that list that they'd like to share, and then that way we are we know that every month that question will be asked, and we might want to have something to say. Doreen.
I would also like to see a database of some sort, and just a place where our community members can go to say, "Hey, I'm looking for, a diversity trainer. I'm looking for someone to come in and do X, Y, Z." I think if we attach that to the document, it doesn't have to be in the forefront, but it's just an opportunity for the community members to see what's out there. If we have a church who's looking to bring in a speaker, for Juneteenth, there's a database, or there are connections that we've already identified as being helpful.
Great. So let's talk about reconstituting these work groups. Unless you think that would be something better done in a retreat setting.
I do think that might be something better done in a retreat setting. Because I've had some time to sit with the baskets, and I'm still like, so in thinking about the basket, I guess there's two schools of thought on how that can get broken up. Is that research would now become law enforcement and commerce, and then community engagement would become arts and culture and housing, and then parks and rec and
that's not a basket yet, though.
Okay.
So education. One of the reasons that we thought that would be better as a fiber woven throughout the baskets is back to this question of who possesses authority to do what. The authority over the school district falls with the board of directors. We can't make recommendations to the borough council about things that should happen in the school district, but we do have things to say about community education opportunities and events and sites, and we do have things to say about things that the borough might do to make sure that there's a vibrant, equitable school district, such as whatever measures might be taken to discourage real estate redlining and other practices that reinforce negative views about schools.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, we can't look at education as something very narrow, because we have summer programs, we have after school programs, we have art programs, all that fall under, underneath the title of education. So I definitely don't want us to have that limited viewpoint when it comes to education.
But it's more like a method or a tool that we're using to attack the baskets rather than a basket itself. Does that make sense? We're not saying, as the research group preliminarily discussed it, we don't see as a feasible outcome recommendations about how to make the school district more equitable, because it's not something that's actionable by the borough. But we do see education as being a thread that's woven. So nobody's going to be sort of dedicated to thinking about how can we achieve truth and reconciliation with respect to education. Rather, all of us will be thinking, how do we weave that thread throughout our truth and reconciliation efforts within these topic areas? So that would be an everybody task, according to one proposal for the redevelopment of the groups, is that everybody is on, okay, what's a community engagement event in this area? So for instance, let's take law enforcement as an example. If you're on the law enforcement group, you might say, oh, an opportunity for community education might be like an active shooter training program for faith communities, given the anti-Semitic violence that's occurred in other communities. So maybe that would be a way to build trust with the Carlisle PD and faith communities, and it's an education event. Does that make sense as a fiber woven into the basket?
Yes.
Okay. So now our question is, can we make more progress on realigning these working groups tonight, or is there a call for another event? Either is your executive session about the group or no?
No.
Okay. Okay. So how do we want to proceed? Do we want to try to come up with a preliminary proposal tonight, or would we like to retreat on this?
I personally think that we are overdue for a retreat. I think that, you know, we can tackle the groups. I think that we can look at the timeline again. I think that we can problem solve a little bit more. So that's just my vote.
Others?
I think that sounds wise.
I'm on board with that as well.
Who?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, we will have a retreat to be announced where we will figure out a way to operationalize this preliminary proposal.
Awesome.
Do I need to make a motion on that? Mm-hmm. No. Great. Perfect. Off to you, Sean.
Thank you. Just a couple of updates. One is council discussed the seal and flag process. So remember, we mostly retired the crest. It's still down here, and it's still on the flag. Yeah, that's gone actually.
The seal's gone.
Yeah, it's not even there anymore. But we outlined a process for the creation of a new seal and flag, which we see as separate, where the seal may change from time to time over the years. You see the flag as something that's more permanent. And Brenda Landis would speak much more eloquently on this than I would. She's very passionate about these issues. But what it looks like is the ERCP committee, so the Employee Relations Citizen Participation Committee, would take the lead on it. That is the Deputy Mayor, Brenda Landis, and our new council member, Kate Mellon. And they would go through a process where staff and the committee would design 3 to 5 questions that would be used to guide the conversation on the seal and flag design. And staff put together just some potential questions. These were just sort of to give a sense of what could be discussed. So here's the draft. What 3 words would you use to describe the borough of Carlisle? What would you like the borough of Carlisle to be known for? Are there images and or words that you believe would portray or identify its spirit and values? And staff pulled that from other communities that went through a similar process. There would then, once we're settled on those questions, there would be a period of community engagement on those questions, emphasizing also that there's going to be a process of outreach for designers and artists to attend those engagement meetings. ERCP would hold the meetings over a period of 4 months at different locations throughout the borough, so we're not expecting everybody to come here to us. We're trying to reach out to around the borough. We would do that through press releases, social media, Engage Carlisle, the citizen lab that we have online, our website, press release. Did I already say press releases? It's on here twice. Consider door-to-door postings and doing mass mailers. After that 4-month engagement period, ERCP may possibly, once they get working on this, compile a working group to review the feedback received from the meetings and questions. And we see potentially, if it fits into your work at the time, that representatives from TRC would be perhaps involved in some of that engagement and outreach, even if just to be there and listen and perhaps provide some feedback. And then that working group would develop a guide to disseminate to the artists and the designers, who would then go to work to give proposals to the borough. Again, we promote that all on social media, press release, and such. Then ERCP would review the proposals for the seal and the flag and make a recommendation to Borough Council. ERCP may decide to do that within the working group. Have that working group sort of make that recommendation, and then council will make a decision in the end. So that's the process we have outlined. ERCP hasn't met yet to really sift through this and get to work on it. Any questions about that? And then just something timely that I'm attending. I'm trying to jump over to the agenda. I'll be attending, it's called the Mayor's Innovation Project winter meeting. It's supposed to be back in January, but COVID didn't make that possible. One of the sessions I'll be attending is called Creating Resilient and Inclusive Economies. So perhaps get some information I can bring back here, especially on the commerce basket, or whatever that basket's called now, or bin. Lou, if you prefer bin.
No, there's a bin in the basket.
Oh, there's a bin inside the basket? Or the basket's in the bin? And then there's also a session on policing reform. So all things that hopeful that I'll come back with some new ideas from that conference, and I can report back on you if I do hear something good. That's all I have.
We appreciate you. Thank you so much for your report. Do we have any folks on Zoom who would like to make a comment? Okay. Oh, Wanda, I stepped out in front of you.
Nope.
You're on now.
You're fine.
I'll pass it over to you.
What exactly?
Announcements.
Okay. Does anyone have any announcements? Yes.
So I want to say just a few more things about the OSU thing. So one thing that I learned that was very surprised to have learned is that in addition to OSU hosting this conference, it was a 3-part conference. Part 1 was hosted by Stanford. Part 2 was OSU. And I think Part 3 will be Harvard. Which one's not like the others. But anyway, one of the things that they decided to do in addition to kind of host a conference is that they also have researchers who are studying TRC groups. And so what I learned is that all of our sessions have been watched by the team of researchers at OSU, which I thought, so they're not watching live most of the time. They are instead watching afterwards, coding what we say, and then developing these for reports that they're writing. And so I just wanted everyone just to be mindful that in addition to our 20,000 residents who are probably tuning in later, we additionally have like people in Columbus, Ohio, who are studying us and writing up things about the successes and failures of TRC groups. And so I just thought that was interesting what I heard when I first got on the call talking on our prep meeting. Someone was like, "Oh, well, at your December meeting, you said this," and I was just like, "Wait, what?" And then I learned, but the reason why I mention is that like, we have moments of internal dissension. What I've learned from talking to people who are watching us and other people across the country is that this happens all the time, and this is something that we should remember, expect, and move on from as the case may be.
And a quick shout out to those watching us. Hey.
It's the researcher in me though that feels like we should have received a disclosure. Like if we're gonna be a sample. Thanks for that. Any other announcements? Fantastic. No other announcements? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. 7:16.